Now, regarding the start of services today, with all the equipment issues that we are having, you guys have heard of Murphy's Law? Remember that? Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. Well, you've never heard of Tony Buchert's Law yet, which is way worse than Murphy's Law, okay? So it's just par for the course. But here we are together on God's Sabbath day. It's good to be amongst all of you today. It's always good to visit the church in Medina. If I were to tell you that you were my favorite church, would you tell anybody else? You won't tell on me, will you? They'll probably tell you that I tell them the same thing, because I love God's people and I love God's church, and I know that in this life there's perhaps nothing more important to our acceleration into God's kingdom and our growth into God's Word, because we are commanded to grow in grace and knowledge. That's not a suggestion by our Creator. That is, in fact, a command that we are to grow in grace and in knowledge. And as we come together, iron sharpens iron. This is perhaps the best laboratory or classroom that we could have as far as dealing with people, dealing with each other, having to overcome, strengthening one another as we find ourselves walking in this world sometimes, because we live in a world, brethren, that quite frankly doesn't reveal to us a lot of goodness at times, does it? I mean, here we are right in the midst, right buttressed against right here some political days that are coming up. And I have witnessed, and I'm sure you have witnessed too, which is going to lead me to what I want to talk about today, some of the worst examples of human hubris and arrogance that our country has ever seen. A lot of hypocrisy that is going on. Do not look to Washington, D.C. as the quintessential example of how to lead people, because you will not find it. This side of the kingdom, what we learn mainly is how not to do things oftentimes. And let me predicate what I'm going to talk about today. If you would please turn over to Micah chapter 6. That's going to serve as my predicate scripture. And Jaden, you did a wonderful job, and you stole all my scriptures today, buddy. What am I going to do? You know? Not really. I gave him the scripture to read today. It's going to lead us into today's topic. Years ago, if memory serves me correct, I think this was about the time when I was in 5th grade. I'm almost pretty sure it was either 4th or 5th grade. My dad decided to pull my brother and I out of school. And it was right before, I believe it was Thanksgiving break. And it was unusual to take your kids out of school during that time, but as time would have it, my dad, he worked 7 days a week, 9-hour days oftentimes. He was a car salesman, so he had to, keep the money coming in, and especially when wintertime came around, things were pretty sparse for us, okay? I can remember this to this day when my dad, he came home from the store one time, and you ever seen those little boxes of Jiffy Mix? So those little boxes, they're like, what, 25 cents? My dad was so elated that he found this little box of Jiffy Mix for 25 cents, and that's all we had probably for 3 months. And to this day, I can't eat Jiffy Mix. But, but he decided that he was going to teach us through a little visit, through a little mini vacation. Oftentimes I didn't get out on a vacation until I think I was 16 years old, 17 years old, to Virginia Beach. But he wanted to do more than give us a little break from school. He wanted to teach us a little lesson on life. And when I first went there, I didn't understand really what that lesson was, and I'm not really sure that he knew what lesson I would take from that trip, or my brother would take from that trip, as we left and what we brought home to us. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Anybody ever been there? I absolutely love that place. Angie and I, for many, many years, we used to take a trek over there, and we would spend a weekend or 3 or 4 days. I absolutely love the town of Gettysburg because it is so well preserved, and the history there is so rich of a time in our country when things could have turned one way or the other, And there's a story I took from that trip from Gettysburg, and it taught me a lot about, of all things, humility. There was a story, you see, and I'm going to do my best to try to recap this because as I get older, my memory gets a little bit dusty, if you will. And I always say I have photographic memory, it's just when it decides to work, okay? It doesn't work all the time. But as our country found itself in one of the most pivotal times in history, we had a little cat and mouse game that was going on. You had General Robert E. Lee in the South. You had General Meade, who was in command of the Army of the Potomac. And you had Robert E. Lee, who really understood that he was outnumbered and he was outgunned, he was outmoneyed. Perhaps he was the best statistician as far as battlefield generals are concerned. He's probably the best general in the Civil War, Robert E. Lee. But he decided to play a cat and mouse game with the Union because he understood that his resources were limited. So what he began to do is he began to move his divisions. Slowly from Virginia, he'd move them a little bit west towards the Tennessee Valley. He'd move a division, and he'd watch what the Union would do. Then the Union would move a division, a little cat and mouse game. Then he'd move a third division, a fourth, and he'd move all these men. All of a sudden, he found himself in this cat and mouse game with this juggernaut called the Army of the Potomac. Okay? Now, as fate would have it, as the two armies met on the battlefield of Gettysburg, the Confederacy really had no idea, really had no plan of really fully engaging the Union Army because they knew that probably wasn't a fight that they were going to win. So Robert E. Lee instilled a bunch of what you call hit and run tactics. You fight, then you retreat. You live to fight another day. So he sent some units into a little town called Gettysburg. It was really a center for trade, a hub of export. It kind of linked the Midwest and Washington, D.C. together. And he sent some of his troops into town because they needed food supplies and they needed shoes. Now you can imagine back in those days, when they marched, sometimes they marched 25, 30 days on a fast march, July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd in the summertime, in full wool uniforms. Can you imagine that? And some people, if they were to fall out of rank when they were wearing these uniforms because they succumbed to the heat, got heat stroke, or whatever else they got from all that dehydration and losing all those electrolytes, oftentimes they were bayoneted or they were hanged. To teach everybody else, you better not fall out of line, right? So after heavy fast marches, Robert E. Lee sends his army into, at least a division of his army, into the town of Gettysburg under the command to not engage the enemy. Under no circumstances are you to get into a battle with the army. So what happens? The Confederacy goes in, they're trying to find their shoes, they're trying to find their food, and they come across what they think is just a little ragtag band of National Guard-type units of cavalry. Okay? So, making a battlefield decision, I can't remember I don't think it was Ewell or Howard or so, I can't remember who it was now in the Confederacy, but they decided that, well, it's just a little ragtag band of cavalry, let's go ahead and take them on, let's go take what we need. Well, pretty soon they found themselves, because what was going on is, do anybody remember what the eyes and the ears of a marching army back in the Civil War was? You relied on your cavalry. The cavalry was the eyes and ears of the army. So Jeb Stuart was off somewhere running his own personal campaign, who was a commander of Robert E. Lee's cavalry, so Robert E. Lee was blind. The field generals consequently were blind. So they engaged this Union National Guard band of cavalry, only to find out that it was the entire Army of the Potomac, because General Meade also matched man for man, and more so the Confederacy with the Army. So we found at that time there was this great big battle that if the Confederacy won, then it was a very easy access straight down one road through Maryland all the way to Washington, D.C., and we could all be living a very much different life today if that would have happened. Okay? But there is a story that illustrates to us, maybe not in a perfect dynamic, maybe not in a perfect way, of how we can obtain something or why we should maintain something that the Bible talks about quite a bit, because here we find ourselves in a time, brethren, where it just seems like we're at the Feast of Tabernacles. It doesn't seem like it was but a couple weeks for me, I don't know about you, where we were just at the Feast of Tabernacles. But now we're what, roughly a month away from Passover? And the spring holy days are already upon us. The spring holy days teach us a lot about sin, a lot about bewaring of the leavening of the Pharisees, about not being puffed up. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about humility, the challenge to our calling. And one of the best stories I can think of, maybe this is more of a story in irony than it is anything else, but there was something that happened on that day, the 1st of July in Gettysburg. There was a commander, actually he was a 2-star general, the highest ranking officer that was killed on the Battle of Gettysburg. Anybody ever heard of the name of John F. Reynolds? John F. Reynolds was a very competent leader. He was a very good tactician. In other words, he commanded the battlefield. He was very well known. Many people think that after some time, John F. Reynolds could have actually taken command of the Army of the Potomac. He was that well respected and that well liked among his men. He was a leader of men. But there's a story in irony as his brigade came against some Confederates that were stronger than they thought they were. As they were coming through this place called Reynolds Woods, okay, there was a battle that happened, a skirmish, if you would, and they were outnumbered by the Confederacy. And as they exchanged fire, he looked into the woods and said, "Boys, with Godspeed, take those woods," because he knew that they were going to be overtaken. He knew it was a matter of time. And he said, "What are you worried about? What are you worried about?" And one of his men said to him, "Sir, the Confederates have just put sharpshooters in the town. Maybe you should get down from your horse." And he said, "Sharpshooters, come on. Those old Johnny Rebs couldn't hit the broadside of the barn." And as soon as those words came out of his mouth, he was shot and mortally killed with a gunshot to the neck. I understand what he was doing. He was trying to motivate his troops, but maybe his words were not humble at that time. He got a little bit too confident. And I'm not going to be too critical of the man, because when you're faced with a juggernaut like that, you've got to motivate people some way. There was another man that was at the Battle of Gettysburg, and many people don't know this. Anybody remember, if I mention the name, George Armstrong Custer? Do you remember him? A lot of people don't understand that he was one of the heroes of the Battle of Gettysburg, because he actually took on Jeb Stuart and his cavalry and won East Cavalry Field. People don't know that. But there's another story that happens a little bit later that I think is a perfect example of humility. And it happens after the Civil War, during the Indian Wars of the Western Confrontation. And you remember what was the name of that battle? Now my brain's going to give up on me. The Battle of Little Bighorn. Who said that? Whoever said that, you get an A, sir. You get an A for today. So General Armstrong Custer was in charge of the 7th Cavalry. He's also known as the Boy General. Anybody remember why he was called the Boy General? He received a battlefield commission during the Civil War. I think he was age 22 or 23. He was a general at that age. And the thing about George Armstrong Custer, if you know anything about him, he was very, very well respected even on the other side of the battlefield, okay? And he wasn't, how do I say this? Anybody ever seen pictures of him, how he used to dress? He had all these golden locks that flowed down. He wore these, what his men said were very highly perfumed scarves, these gloves, and he had to just look just so. But the man was very courageous. When George Armstrong Custer came out on the battlefield, he was cheered not only by the Union, but he was also cheered by the Confederates. I don't know if you knew that or not, because what he would do to get his troops mustered, to get them ready to fight, is he'd come out on the battlefield. You know, what was the first thing that somebody would go for if you're in a battle? You go after the commander, right? If you kill the head, the body dies, right? But when George Armstrong Custer came out on the field, everybody looked at him and thought, man, what is he going to do today? And the Confederates would put down their guns and say, what is he going to do today? Because what he'd do is he'd come out there in all of his pomp and all of his perfume and everything, is he'd stand right out there in front of his troops on his horse. And he'd say all kinds of things to the Confederacy. You boys are going to take a whooping today. And he would talk all kinds of trash to them. And just to show you how bad of a whooping you're going to take, he would take his horse and he'd actually jump over their battle lines, back and forth. And it became so crazy that even the Confederate troops would throw their hats in the air and cheer all of his pageantry and everything. But that all came to an end. That all came to an end at the Battle of Little Bighorn, because he wasn't used to losing. He was used to winning all of his battles. So he goes in to the encampment. He splits his troops. He takes over command of one division. He sends General Reno down to the south to engage what they thought was just a few hundred Indians. It turned out to be over 10,000. General Reno takes a whipping. General Custer goes in. Instead of waiting for reinforcements like he was supposed to, and thus down through history comes the Battle of Little Bighorn and Custer's last stand. But if you read the Indian accounts of the Custer's last stand, it really wasn't much of a last stand. He was completely routed and they were slaughtered because General Custer was too arrogant and had too much hubris to listen to somebody who was beneath him, to take the directions from somebody who was of a lesser command. So as a result of that, of his arrogance, his troops were killed. Almost every last one of them, except for some that retreated on some ridge. Okay? It was a horrific day. If he would have just humbled himself and would have just listened to somebody who fell underneath his ranks, because you can't tell me anything, I'm George Armstrong Custer, that may not have happened. We may read a different story down through history, but because of the arrogance, things happen. Now, humility, I'm going to say this, and maybe you may agree with it, maybe you won't agree with it. It is perhaps the biggest challenge to anybody that God has created with free moral agency. I'm not talking about the animal kingdom. I'm talking about the spiritual kingdom, kingdom of the angels, and I'm talking about mankind. It is the biggest challenge to what we call this thing Christianity in our walk with Christ as we try to maintain this walk with Him and try to maintain the prize of the upward call, as the Apostle Paul would say. Sometimes that's a challenge to us because we live in a world that is so puffed up. Rather, and time after time, we see examples of arrogance and hubris that really serve as a stumbling block for many people. So it beckons the question to us today as we go into the spring holy days. Because it was arrogance that caused the first sin in the heavenly realm, and it was arrogance and hubris that caused the first sin in the human realm. Believe it or not. Okay? It is the underlying, underscored reason why we deal with this thing called sin and why Jesus Christ had to die. You know, there's a reason why He's called the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. Because He was not puffed up like His adversary was. What is required of us as we go into this day of Passover and the days of unleavened bread? Well, God has an answer for us in Micah chapter 6. If you're not already turned there, I'm going to go ahead and read this. In Micah chapter 6, this will serve as our predicate scripture, and perhaps this is the lesson. This thing called humility is something that I learned over time in the ministry, and some very hard lessons. But it says in verse 6 of Micah chapter 6, "With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before the high God? Shall I come before Him with burnt offerings, with calves of a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgressions, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul?" Notice what he's getting at. What is going to please the Lord? What does He want from me? I could kill 10,000s of rams, but if I'm lacking something, I got nothing. What does God require of us, brethren? Okay, let's continue down through here. "He has shown you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justly?" Now, in our world, we don't see very much justice, not true justice. We live in a world that's bent on revenge. Think about it. If you wrong somebody, and we're human, there's times when we wrong somebody, maybe we don't mean to. Sometimes people will take our apologies, but sometimes, you know what people want? They want to get you back. They don't care about justice. They don't care about equity. They don't care about doing the right thing. It's all about getting you back. Boy, you wronged me, now you got one coming. Okay? At least that's the way of the world. But to do justly, to love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. So what does God require of us? I would narrow it down to one word as we enter these days of Passover and the days of unleavened bread and on to Pentecost. How about humility? Now, When you think about humility and you get a picture of somebody in your mind, what comes to mind? Think about it. Get the image in your brain. Somebody who kind of walks down, cut their head down, or walks like this, and, oh, gee whiz, my life is horrible. Is that humility? Is it never responding to somebody in a way that's not humble? See, sometimes we think that because we're supposed to walk humbly with our God that we can never answer somebody the way that they answer us. And this is something that I learned a long time. And humility is something that we should use to one another and we should expect to have from one another. But many years ago, as I started my ministry, let's go over to, where do I want to go here today? Let's go to Proverbs 15, if you would please. Proverbs chapter 15. Years ago, and I'm talking years ago, can't remember how long, 10, 11 years ago, as I was first starting out. It's where do I want to go here? 15, verse 1. This is probably the best way to handle issues with anybody, let alone people in the church. It says, a soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. The tongue of the wise uses knowledge rightly, but the mouth of fools pours forth foolishness. The eyes of the Lord are in every place, keeping watch on the evil and the good. A wholesome tongue is a tree of life, but a perverseness in it breaks the spirit. A fool despises his father's instruction, but he who receives correction is prudent. Now, I would go to this church and I would visit many times, and I kid you not, every single time I gave a message, or any time, not just me, but any other minister would give a message, this person always had contention or always had something negative to say. Okay? And I won't tell you what I said, but after probably about 5 or 6 times of this, I'd had enough, because now it's time to set some boundaries. Okay? Because I don't want to be harassed every time I give a message, so I responded in a way that probably was not humble. I responded to him in a way that let him know, okay, great, I know I'm not perfect, but you need to understand that you're not either. Okay? My tone probably wasn't the way it should be. It wasn't soft. I did set some expectations, but you know what I felt afterwards? I felt kind of bad. You ever have that experience where somebody's just bothering you, they never leave you alone, you respond in a way because you're emotional about it, you're tired of putting up with it, and next thing you know, after you say what you've got to say, maybe it needs to be said, but maybe in a different way, you're the one that feels bad. And you think to yourself, maybe I should have just said nothing. I should have just kept my mouth shut, because the fallout is not worth just accepting the wrong that we're accepting. But sometimes, brethren, it does behoove us to understand that the Bible does not tell us that we cannot respond to somebody. Here's what it is. When somebody comes up to me and they're arrogant, now someone comes up to me and says, Tony, look, have you considered something? I want you to consider something about what you just said. I'll say, you know what? Okay. But they come up and say, that was ridiculous what you said up there. You know what? You know how I respond? Assertive aggressive. That's my first response. Maybe that's not the way it should be, and people say ministers should not respond that way. I'd like to give us a little bit different scenario, okay? Because there is always a time to respond in certain ways to people. Let's go over to, again, in Proverbs, chapter 26. This is humility in dealing with one another. And I'm going to stop where most people stop in this scripture and see where it could cause us some problems with this thing called humility. Proverbs chapter 26, verse 1, if you would please. As snow in summer and rain in harvest, so honor is not fitting for a fool. Like a flitting sparrow, like a flying swallow, so a curse without cause shall not alight. A whip for the horse, a bridle for the donkey, and a rod for the fool's back. Do not answer a fool according to his folly, lest you be like him. Now stop. This is where most people stop. Because what happens is, and I've said this for many, many years, and not just me, but anybody who is an expert in relationships and how you maintain relationships, what they'll tell you is, psychologists, psychiatrists, they will say, it can often take years, decades, a lifetime, if you will, to establish and to maintain these things called relationships. Would you agree with that? Husband and wives, I don't know about you, but sometimes it's an ongoing battle to maintain peace. I'm just kidding. God knew that I would need a very patient wife, okay? So he sent me the right person, okay? But in all this time that we spend maintaining relationships, making relationships, keeping those connections, maybe it could be a family member, maybe it's somebody in the church, in the congregation, maybe it's somebody that we have at work. All the time that we spend in building trust and establishing these relationships and getting to know one another, it can take years. It can only take a few words to ruin it. You ever experienced that? So we ought to be careful with our words sometimes, because when they come out of our mouths, when we respond the way we shouldn't, oftentimes we find ourselves in a situation where we say, you know what, I don't really think that was worth it. Okay? Because relationships are ruined that way. However, there is a time to answer somebody according to the way that they approach us. And it's found right here in the same verse of Scriptures. Let's continue reading through here. I'll read that again for us. Do not answer a fool according to his folly, lest you also be like him. In other words, not only is it not right for relationships, but guess what? Your reputation is ruined. You can ruin your reputation by answering somebody according to the way that the fool approaches you. Okay? But then it continues. Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes. In other words, when someone comes up to us and they talk to us in a way that we don't appreciate, or in the manner or the tone in which they speak to us in, it is perfectly okay to answer them in the way that says, I don't want to deal with that anymore. I don't want to deal with that. Come towards me humbly, and then I will approach you humbly. But if you come at me towards arrogance, you're going to get a sort of arrogance back. Why? Because you need to set boundaries with some people sometimes. And that's just the way it is. And that's just a hard lesson in relationships that we have to learn. But what about our Christian walk? Our Christian walk in this thing called humility. Do you realize that it takes humility to actually answer the call of God? Think about that. When you were first called into the gospel, into the good news of Jesus Christ, did your life get easier? I hope I'm not alone in this. I know, I look back at my calling, and there's a lady in the Columbus, Ohio church, Jean Kirk. She's 93, going on 94 years old now. She's been laid up with a broken leg. But I can remember after being baptized by Bill Watson and Wayne Hendricks, everything was good. We went back to church, and she was like the mother to all of us, as far as those of us who were called into this calling. She taught us a lot, taught us how to unleaven our houses, how to keep the holy days, really just an exceptional pillar. And I sat down across from her, Angie and I did, and we were talking, and she said, "Get ready." This was just a couple days after our baptism. I said, "What do you mean, get ready? We just got here. I mean, we're just talking." "Put on your seatbelt." "What are you talking about?" I'm sitting in my chair going, "Put on my seatbelt." She goes, "Yeah, duh." You heard Jean Kirk. She said, "Duh, you were just baptized." I said, "Yeah, what are you getting at?" "Buckle up your seatbelt, because when you thought things were going to get better, you're going to be tested." And I thought, "You're crazy. I've made it now. This is it." I've been baptized. What do you mean I'm going to be challenged? It was a challenge just to get here. After dealing with family and friends who walk away from you and call you crazy. Let's say you're a lunatic, you belong to a cult, whatever the case may be, we had to make a decision to either follow our Creator and the calling, or give in, like the parable of the sower would indicate to us, and people oftentimes do, trials and tribulations, where family members don't like what we're going to do. They start to challenge us and question us and get us to question what we're doing, and we had to somehow humble ourselves to a point where we responded to that calling and said, forsake everything else, not that we don't maintain relationships. I hope you found the same thing that I do. This is what I found in life. We follow God, we humble ourselves, we walk with Him humbly. We do our best to progress in this thing called Christianity. And oftentimes, what you find when people leave you, they don't want to talk to you. They want nothing to do with you. They call you a member of a cult. Whatever they say about you, I've heard it all, and I'm sure you have too. Okay? We had to decide what we were going to do. We had to decide whether or not we were going to succumb to pressures and challenges, the negative naysayers in our lives, or whether or not we were going to humble ourselves and do what we knew was to be right because we understood that this was an opportunity. How many people in this world actually accept, brethren? I don't even know how to do the math on that. You're talking about all the religions of the world, all the branches and divisions and all the different branches of Christianity, branches within branches, offshoots of offshoots. How many people in this world have ever been part and parcel to answer the call of God? Now, let me explain this just a little bit. Oftentimes we'll say this, I've heard this many times in the church, that you can't come to God unless you're called. All right, I understand that. I understand that concept. But how does God call people? And who does God choose? You ever sit there and mill that around in your mind? What does God use to call people? What is His mode? It's this. See, God sends out a general call to humanity. Many, many years ago, I think this was probably back in the mid-2000s, probably 2005, 2006, somewhere around there, I gave a sermon on the Bible. And at that time, the world was roughly a year to a year and a half away from having every single language that has ever been known to mankind translated into this word right here. Let me just summarize it for you. You know who God calls? You know who God chooses? Those who humble themselves and respond no matter the cost. Are we not taught in Luke chapter 14 to count the cost? There's a reason why He says that, because it is a very tough road sometimes to hoe. Now, in our culture, the reason I'm talking about humility, if you turn with me to 1 Corinthians chapter 1, there is a reality check. Because sometimes, believe it or not, the things that we know, the wisdom that God has given us, the mystery of the ages, if you will, that God has shown us, maybe not in totality, but in part, sometimes within itself can breed a certain amount of arrogance. Do you remember the days when you were first enlightened? Come on, I hope I'm not alone in this one either. You remember when you would share the gospel of Jesus Christ with somebody? Oftentimes, at least in my situation, it wasn't with humility. I will admit that to everybody. When I first was exposed to this thing called the way or the truth, you know what I used it for? Listen, I'm just being honest with you. I'm just keeping it real with you. I used it to win arguments. I utilized it to win debates. It wasn't really about the truth. It was about being the smartest in the room sometimes. That didn't get me very far. Because there's one thing that I've learned about Christianity and the requirement that God has for us to walk humbly with Him. If we don't humble ourselves, He will remove the hedges and He will humble us. If you think about all the people who were called, when Jesus first started his ministry, they began to call his disciples. Do you remember most of them left with him willingly? Do you remember that? Oh yeah, Lord, okay. Here, I'll drop what I'm doing and I'll follow you, no problem. The original 12 did that. They did. I mean, it's a matter of account in the Scriptures. There's one that did not. Do you remember who that was? He came later on. The Apostle Paul, he didn't go willingly. He had to be humbled. Okay? But in our culture, the things that we understand and know, even though we don't know everything, I think that's important that we do admit. The Bible reveals, but it doesn't reveal all things, so we can't pretend that we have all the answers to the things that the Bible just, quite frankly, doesn't answer. We use it to win debates. We use it to win arguments. We utilized it in the wrong way, and we forgot along the way something very important. Let's go to the Scriptures here. Let's go to verse 20 of 1 Corinthians chapter 1, if I got this correctly. Where's the wise? Where's the scribe? Where is the disputer of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of this world? For since in wisdom of God, the world through wisdom did not know God, it pleased God through the foolishness of the message preached to save those who believe. For the Jews request a sign, Greeks seek after wisdom. But we preach Christ crucified, to the Jews a stumbling block, and to the Greeks foolishness. But those who are called both Jews and Greeks, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God, because the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. So we think about what we know, what we do, the gifts that God gives us. We have to understand that part of our humility is understanding from whence it comes from. We attain nothing in and of ourselves. Well, there might have been some basic foundations in the Scriptures, but it took God to turn the lights on for us. And that's a fact. It took God to do that, okay? There's nothing great about ourselves. And I'll tell you why I'm talking about this in here just a second. For you see your calling, continuing here, brethren, that not many wise according to the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble are called. Whew. Ouch. These set of scriptures here for the New Testament church serves as a reality check to us. It is through God that we do what we do. It is through God's power and His Holy Spirit that we know what we know. And it's through God that we do the work, whatever the work we find ourselves doing, or the gifts that we possess, we utilize. Not in and of ourselves. That within itself should humble us. That is God who allows that. But God has chosen the foolish things of the world to put to shame the wise, and God has chosen the weak things of the world to put to shame the things which are mighty. And the base things of the world and the things which are despised God has chosen, and the things which are not, to bring to nothing the things that are, that no flesh should glory in His presence. But of Him you are in Christ Jesus, who became for us wisdom from God, the righteousness and sanctification and redemption, that as it is written, He who glorifies, let him glory in the Lord. Now, the reason I want to bring this up, because the things that we know, the things that God has revealed to us, the truth about the holy days, Christmas and Easter being false, the truth about heaven and hell, the truth about the resurrection, all the things that He has taught us, sometimes can bring about a little bit of an arrogant mindset. And in the most extreme examples, okay, especially when we're dealing with friends and family, in the most extreme examples, I don't know how many of you remember this or are aware of this, but years ago, and on several occasions in the home office down in Tyler, Texas, we have people who start out good. They're well-intentioned. They're on the right track. And the next thing you know, they're at the home office. Hey guys, how you doing? I'm Jesus Christ. Oh, hi guys, I'm now a prophet sent by God. People that oftentimes we sit with, in the pews or in the chairs, all of a sudden get this messianic complex or this prophet complex where they think they're the chosen, they're the called one, they're the mighty one of God. I'm dealing with it right now to the point where I have to get my carry concealed weapon. Because I'm dealing with a guy now, this is my second stalker now, who believes that Jesus is going to punish me and he's the tool by which he's going to use. Sat in the congregations for decades. Decades. And now all of a sudden, because he let it get to his head, remember what the Bible says? Remember what Paul told the Corinthian church? A little leaven leavens the whole lump. If we lose sight on anything in life, it ought not to be this. That it is Christ who compels us. It is our Christ that gives us everything that we are. He is our supplier. He is our creator. He's our motivator. He is the one that allows us to take every single breath that we have. Without Him, we are nothing. I don't understand how people go from sitting in our chairs in our pews and being a member of our fellowship, all of a sudden decide one day, oh, I've got this prophecy you guys got to hear. Oh, and if you don't hear it, you're going to be punished by Jesus Christ, and I'm going to do it. What spawns that? Where does that come from? A mental condition, perhaps? Demonic vexations? Probably. Because when you start thinking that way, guess what happens? You lose sight of all perspective. You lose all humility. And you put on arrogance and hubris. I would submit to you that arrogance and hubris is the oldest sin that we've ever dealt with. It is the underlying reason why we find everything going wrong in the world that we do. And, can I have a time check, hon? I'm at 41? Okay. I got to get going through this. So, brethren, let's skip through some things here. And let's go to, man, I just don't have time to get there. Let's go to Isaiah 14, if you would, please. Isaiah chapter 14. This has been one of my favorite scriptures for a long time because it reveals a lot about why. And I talked about those who have free moral agency, why it's important to remember this thing. And it would include the angelic realm. And as we approach Passover, we're told to examine ourselves. And as we're approaching Passover, the idea and the analogy of leavening, a type of sin, just takes a little bit to puff up. You know, we're still dealing with the original cause of sin. We are still dealing with the ultimate reason why things went wrong in the angelic realm. We're still dealing with the fact that Adam and Eve were not the first sinners. You know, we're wrong when we say that. We are wrong when we say Adam and Eve were the first sinners. Okay? And I get some pushback. I get pushback on this, but I'm going to say it again. Eve was the first human sinner, and that's a fact, and the New Testament validates that. She was the first sinner. Adam was not right there next to her, and I got the Hebraic expressions to prove that, but I don't have time to get into it today. He was not right there with her. He fell after her. Okay? But be that as it may, come on, guys, who was the first sinner? Satan. You know what's so sad about that story? You know, Satan is it's more of a title than it is a name. What does Satan mean, brethren? Our adversary. What was his name originally? Hillel in the Latin. Lucifer. Anybody remember what Lucifer means? He was supposed to be a bringer of light to the world. He was supposed to facilitate this plan of salvation to human beings. He was supposed to be a mouthpiece for God. He was supposed to be a bringer of righteousness to this planet. He failed. He utterly failed. Why? Let's let the Bible answer that. This is why we talk about arrogance and hubris and humility and things like this. Let's just go to verse 9, if you would, please. Now, I do know that there's some historical references that are mentioned here, but in the backdrop is, in fact, Lucifer, okay? Hell from beneath is excited about you. This is Isaiah chapter 14 and verse 9. It stirs up the dead for you, all the chief ones of the earth. It has raised up from their thrones. all the kings of the nations, that all shall speak and say to you, have you also become weak as we? Have you become like us? Your pomp is brought down to Sheol, or the grave. The sound of your stringed instruments, the maggot is spread under you, and worms cover you. Sometimes we forget that, Lucifer was also one of the ones who was the main reasons for some of the music. He was a musician, if you will. Okay? He was covered like no other beast. He was created more perfect than any beast of the field. He was perfect in wisdom and beauty. And that within itself is not a bad thing, but it got to his head. It went straight up here to his ego, and here's what happened. How you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, or light bringer, son of the morning, how you are cut down to the ground. You who weakened the nation. So why do we see all the things going on in the world that we do? Why do we see all the bad things going on? Is anybody ready to see some good things going on? That can't happen until he's removed. We see a temporary removal of Satan in the millennial reign of Christ. The angel drags him away in chains and puts him away for 1,000 years. Until the 1,000 years were finished, he must be loosed again. I wish we would get away from, in our culture, the idea that we displace Satan in the ceremony of the Azazel goat. I wish we would quit saying that both of those goats represent Jesus Christ. They do not represent Christ, not both of them. One goat for Azazel, one goat for the Lord. End of story. How do we have a holy day plan? How does God show us through His holy day calendar and the days that we keep what sin is, how sin came into the world, His answer for sin, His Son Jesus Christ and His sacrifice, and leave out the original causer of everything? Are we going to let this guy fly underneath the radar? Are we going to let him go undetected? Because that's one of his greatest deceptions, brethren. His greatest deception is not that you are an immortal being. It's not that you possess immortality. That is a big lie. But what's the biggest lie Satan ever told this world? That he does not exist. And what do we do sometimes? We want to remove him from that Azazel goat ceremony and the laying on of the guilt of the goat's head and say, oh, that just represents Jesus taking our sins to heaven. But wait a minute, that goat was never to return. Jesus Christ is going to return. For crying out loud, just look at what he admits. Take a look at what he admits. If you turn to the occult, I'm not asking you to do that. Don't mess with that stuff. Don't get out your Ouija boards. Don't go into too depths about this way of Satan. It's not good. Do not challenge him. Leave him alone because he's very powerful. And as I've often said, God can remove the hedges. And He will remove the hedges if we get too arrogant. Okay? We just need to speak truthfully about this. But when you look at the symbols of the occult, how is Satan represented? What does the pentagram represent? It's the head of a goat. So if he fully admits it, and his constituents and his followers fully admit it, and the Scriptures seem to indicate that that's part of the plan to remove him, why would we ignore it? But I digress. Let's get back to this here. You who weaken the nations, for you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit on the mount of the congregation. On the furthest sides of the north, I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High, yet you shall be brought down to Sheol, the lowest depths of the pit. Those who see you shall gaze at you and consider your saying, is this the man who made the earth tremble, who shook kingdoms, and who made the world as a wilderness and destroyed its cities, who did not open the house of its prisoners? What is the underlying cause of the problems in this world, brethren? It is in fact sin. Sin is the reason why we deal with the things that we deal with, And it resonates all the way back to almost 6,000 years ago, back to the Garden of Eden, and we are still dealing with the residuals to this day. Not only in the federal sense, all the way back to the Garden of Eden, not that we're just under a condition of sin, but how many of us deal with sin in our lives every single day? Anybody have a sin? Show me your hands if you're a sinner. Oh. I don't see any righteous people in this room. You're in good company. Because any righteousness that we have is as just filthy rags to God. That doesn't mean we're not supposed to try. Doesn't mean that we're not supposed to put forth the effort to live up to God's standards. We are, in fact, called for good works. And I know the world doesn't like to hear that. We're called to maintain good works. Good works takes humility. Okay? Because what is the world? When the world does good works, what does the world expect in return? Think about it. Let's bring up the modern terms. So you got a Pee Wee League softball, baseball, or football. And you have a team that loses. What do they expect now? An award. They expect a trophy. You see, what the world expects in return, as a result of the works, their good works that they do, they expect accolades and recognition. Most people who serve God, if you consider it this way, most of us who sit in these chairs or give sermons, whatever our gifts are, will never receive an accolade until Jesus Christ returns. I'm okay with that. Are you? That's called humility. And if we need an award, we need recognition, or we need something to say, good job, good boy. You did a good job. Sometimes in this world, it almost seems like people need to grow a third arm, so they need help patting themselves on the back. Boy, look what I did. Huh. Wow, look at that. What a great accomplishment. We're all about our bios. We're all about talking about what good we do and stuff like that. I'm talking about the world now. When really, if you have that humility, it won't matter. In James chapter 4, it's very important for us to remember. It's ironic sometimes that spring holy days, about repentance from dead works, baptism, laying on of hands, and the Holy Spirit, that oftentimes we find out that the spring and fall holy days recapitulate, and it's hard not to talk about this thing called sin without talking about the original causer of the sin, and sometimes we find ourselves going into the fall holy days because they mix and mingle. But to the Christian, to those of us, in verse 1, where do wars of chapter 4 of James and fights come from among you? Do they not come from your desires for pleasure that war in your members? You lust and do not have, you murder and covet and cannot obtain. You fight and war, yet you do not have because you do not ask. You ask and do not receive because you ask amiss, that you may spend it on your own pleasures. One of the biggest acts of arrogance and hubris in the churches today is the health and prosperity doctrine. Time after time, you'll drive by on the streets and you'll see these license plates. Or say something like, because of God, God blessed me or whatever. Because they're driving a Mercedes or they're driving some expensive vehicle and they think that their reward is in this life, and that looks like that's their reward here, okay? Adulterers and adulterers, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Whoever therefore wants to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy or an adversary of God. Or do you think that the Scripture says in vain, the Spirit who dwells in us yearns jealously, but He gives more grace? Therefore, He says, God resists the proud, but gives grace unto the humble. So what is the greatest thing that we can possess besides the Holy Spirit? What is the characteristic that God wants us to put on the most? If you think about it, it's simply humility and to walk humbly with our Creator. Sometimes that is a challenge to God's people because we are surrounded by so much arrogance and hubris. And it's easy to fall into that trap. It really is. Why do we think that God gives us these cyclical times where it comes back every year? Holy days. Examine yourselves. How are you doing? Before we take the Passover, we should have examined ourselves. We should be truthful with ourselves. There is no way to hide anything from our Creator, so we might as well be completely honest about it. You know, I want to turn to one of my favorite examples, and maybe it's one of yours too, of one of the greatest examples of humility in the Scriptures. And let's go to, where do I want to go? Let's go to 1 Samuel 24, if you would, please. If you ever want a good, heartfelt story on friendship, you need to turn no further than to see the relationship that was bonded and forged in trust and humility through Jonathan and David. You ever take some time to read that story? How close these two were? You know, the Bible says that there is a friend that sticketh closer than a brother does. And of course, Jonathan and David were just that towards one another. You know, they were more like brothers than anything else. Jonathan, being the son of Saul, even helped David sometimes escape, you know, Saul's capture and his ultimate death is what would happen. One of the greatest examples of humility this side of Jesus Christ is found in a young David, King David. Now later on, you'll notice a change in David. Remember in the early parts of David's walk with God, remember what it said? And David walked with God. That indicates humility, as we read in Micah chapter 6. Remember what it says when David died? It just said David died. You see, David changed over time. God even had to tell David that, you know what? You know, I've made you a warrior. I've made you a king in Israel. I've given you everything. And you've become a little bloodthirsty, David. You've taken a little bit too far. David was a premeditated murderer. You remember that? Remember that? Because he got a woman pregnant, called her husband from the battle lines and said, hey, have some time with your wife. And the man was so humble, as a leader of his men, he said, no. I will sleep outside because my men can't be with their wives. I'll sleep outside. David said, this is a problem now. Now I can't blame the pregnancy on him. I got an idea. Let's send him to the front of the battle lines. Yeah, he'll die there. And he did. That's called premeditated murder. David was a felon, okay? So he's not perfect, okay? But in this instance, this is one of my favorite stories. Let me see where to start here. Where do I go? I don't want to read the whole thing. I don't have time. In verse 4, if you would please, in 24 of 1 Samuel. Then the men of David said to him, this is the day of which the Lord said to you, behold, I will deliver your enemy into your hand, that you may do to him as it seems good to you. Boy, when we got our enemies right where we want them, what do we want to do? We want to let them linger? Or do we want to get rid of them quickly? Harm them so they can't harm us. See, that's the way of the world, okay? But watch the humility in this guy. Just by way of reminder, let's read this. And David arose and secretly cut off a corner of Saul's robe. Now here's your enemy. He sought your life many times. He has made his intentions well known. He doesn't like you. He's jealous of you. He knows you're going to get the kingdom. You have opportunity to not just cut his robe, but to cut his throat. David had every right and reason to do that. And what did he do? What was his response to that? Man, I would think that we would not see this kind of humility in the world. David was a good example of it. Now it happened afterward that David's heart troubled him because he had cut Saul's robe. That troubled him. Boy, that's humility. That really is. He had the opportunity to take the man's life and could have taken the man's life, but that bothered him. Why did it bother him? And he said to his men, the Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my master. The Lord's anointed to stretch out my hand against him, seeing he is anointed of the Lord. He was more concerned at this point in his life with walking humbly with his God than he was about exacting revenge or getting revenge. He put aside his arrogance and hubris and did what he thought was right in the Lord's eyes. That is the perfect example of humility. Now, I know my time is short. I was going to go into the gifts of our Creator and how we utilize those, but I don't have time to do that. But let's turn to Philippians chapter 2, because I said Jaden had stepped all over my scriptures. But not really, because I wanted him to start so I could finish here. And I'm just at time here, guys. So let's speed read here. In chapter 2 of the book of Philippians, hear the conclusion of the matter. Therefore, in verse 1, if there is any consolation in Christ, if any comfort of love, if any fellowship of the Spirit, if any affection and mercy, fulfill my joy, being like-minded, having the same love, being of one accord, of one mind. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit. No one ever gets far when those are used in doing good. But in lowliness of mind. And when we say lowliness of mind, I know I might go a minute over time here, but there was a sermon given years ago by Ted Armstrong, and I have to, in a manner of speaking, restate what he said. That he said growing up in the church, I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember his exact word, it's been a couple decades now since I remember this, and I'll use cleaner words than he did in the sermon. He had a slip up in this sermon, I remember it like yesterday. He said, I began to realize in my walk with Christ that I was nothing but a piece of garbage. And it took me years to realize that God does not look at me like a piece of garbage. So when we say lowliness of mind, it doesn't mean that you have to think of yourself in a derogatory state. He's not saying self-abased and beat yourself up. He's just saying recognize what we are, as far as our character is concerned at times. He says just keep a lowliness in mind, keep humble. Let each esteem others better than himself. And that's a very good concept. That's a very good principle in the Scriptures. Coming up here, we'll be washing each other's feet. It's hard to be arrogant when you're humbled and bent at your knee and scrubbing someone else's feet. And that's the lesson of that whole scenario, to be humble. Let each of you look out not only for his own interest, but also for the interest of others. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Jesus Christ, who being in the form of God, did not consider it robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, taking the form of a bondservant, and coming in the likeness of men, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even to the death of the cross. Therefore, God also has highly exalted him and given him the name which is above every name, and at that name of every knee should bow, of those in heaven and of those on earth and of those under the earth, and that every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. So as we go into about a month now, the night of Passover, remember we are to examine ourselves. Sometimes that can get brutally honest. We should come to no other conclusion that we are sinners. Nothing within and of ourselves makes us worthy of the Christ sacrifice, but we should humbly accept what he's offered us, regardless of that. Okay? It is through arrogance and hubris that kingdoms are lost. I didn't have time to go into the book of Daniel. It is through arrogance and humility that sin enters, or lack of humility, enters into our lives. So if we want to know what this is really about, what God wants, what is holy days from day one to the last great day, from Passover to the last great day, the lesson of humility, because that's really what started this track of sin. And God can only come back and he can only establish his kingdom when the original causer is done away with. When he establishes his kingdom, we'll all walk humbly with and walk pleasing to our Lord. So, brethren, I don't know if I'll see you again before the spring holy days, but may God enrich and bless each and every one of you as we take the time to humble ourselves, to examine ourselves. Have a good Passover and Days of Unleavened Bread and Pentecost season, and God be with you.